The Mahabharata. Section CI. Samhava Parva continued. Vaisampayana said, O monarch, after the nuptials were over, King Santanu established his beautiful bride in his household. Soon after was born of Satyavati an intelligent and heroic son of Santanu named Chitrangada. He was endued with great energy and became an eminent man. The Lord Santanu of great prowess also begot upon Satyavati another son, named Vishitravirya, who became a mighty bowman and who became king after his father. And before that bull among men, viz., Vishitravirya, attained to majority, the wise King Santanu realized the inevitable influence of time. And after Santanu had ascended to heaven, Bhishma, placing himself under the command of Satyavati, installed that suppressor of foes, viz. Chitrangada, on the throne, who, having soon vanquished by his prowess all monarchs, considered not any man as his equal. And beholding that he could vanquish men, asuras, and the very gods, his namesake, the powerful king of the Gandharvas, approached him for an encounter. Between that Gandharv and that foremost one of the Kurus, who were both very powerful, there occurred on the field of Kurukshetra a fierce combat, which lasted full 3 years on the banks of the Sarasvati. In that terrible encounter characterized by thick showers of weapons and in which the combatants ground each other fiercely, the Gandharv, who had greater prowess or strategic deception, slew the Kuru prince. Having slain Chitrangada, that first of men and oppressor of foes, the Gandharv ascended to heaven. When that tiger among men endued with great prowess was slain, Bhishma, the son of Santanu, performed, O king, all his obsequies. He then installed the boy Vishitravirya of mighty arms, still in his minority, on the throne of the Kurus. And Vishitravirya, placing himself under the command of Bhishma, ruled the ancestral kingdom. And he adored Santanu's son Bhishma, who was conversant with all the rules of religion and law, so, indeed, Bhishma also protected him that was so obedient to the dictates of duty. Section CII. Samhava Parva continued. Vaisampayana said, O thou of Kuru's race, after Chitrangada was slain, his successor Vishitravirya being a minor, Bhishma ruled the kingdom, placing himself under the command of Satyavati. When he saw that his brother, who was the foremost of intelligent men, attained to majority, Bhishma set his heart upon marrying Vishitravirya. At this time he heard that the 3 daughters of the king of Kasi, all equal in beauty to the Apsaras themselves, would be married on the same occasion, selecting their husbands at a self-choice ceremony. Then that foremost of Kar warriors, that vanquisher of all foes, at the command of his mother, went to the city of Varanasi in a single chariot. There Bhishma, the son of Santanu, saw that innumerable monarchs had come from all directions. And there he also saw those 3 maidens that would select their own husbands. And when the assembled kings were each being mentioned by name, Bhishma chose those maidens, on behalf of his brother. And taking them upon his chariot, Bhishma, that first of smiters in battle, addressed the kings, O monarch, and said in a voice deep as the roar of the clouds, the wise have directed that when an accomplished person has been invited, a maiden may be bestowed on him, decked with ornaments and along with many valuable presents. Others again may bestow their daughters by accepting a couple of kine. Some again bestow their daughters by taking a fixed sum, and some take away maidens by force. Some wed with the consent of the maidens, some by drugging them into consent, and some by going unto the maidens' parents and obtaining their sanction. Some again obtain wives as presents for assisting at sacrifices. Of these, the learned always applaud the eighth form of marriage. Kings, however, speak highly of the Swayamvara, the fifth form, as above, and themselves wed according to it. But the sages have said that that wife is dearly to be prized who is taken away by force, after the slaughter of opponents, from amidst the concourse of princes and kings invited to a self-choice ceremony. Therefore, ye monarchs, I bear away these maidens hence by force. Strive ye, to the best of your might, to vanquish me or to be vanquished. Ye monarchs, I stand here resolved to fight. Kuru prince, endued with great energy, thus addressing the assembled monarchs and the king of Kasi, took upon his car those maidens. And having taken them up, he sped his chariot away, challenging the invited kings to a fight. The challenged monarchs then all stood up, slapping their arms and biting their nether lips in wrath. And loud was the din produced, as, in a great hurry, they began to cast off their ornaments and put on their armor. And the motion of their ornaments and armor, O Janame Jaya, brilliant as these were, resembled meteoric flashes in the sky. And with brows contracted and eyes red with rage, the monarchs moved in impatience, their armor and ornaments dazzling or waving with their agitated steps. The charioteers soon brought handsome cars with fine horses harnessed thereto. Those splendid warriors then, equipped with all kinds of weapons, rode on those cars, and with uplifted weapons pursued the retreating chief of the Kurus. Then, O Bharata, occurred the terrible encounter between those innumerable monarchs on one side and the Kuru warrior alone on the other. And the assembled monarchs threw at their foe 10,000 arrows at the same time. Bhishma, however, speedily checked those numberless arrows before they could come at him by means of a shower of his own arrows as innumerable as the down on the body. Then those kings surrounded him from all sides and rained arrows on him like masses of clouds showering on the mountain breast. But Bhishma, arresting with his shafts the course of that arrowy downpour, pierced each of the monarchs with 3 shafts. The latter, in their turn pierced Bhishma, each with 5 shafts. But, O king, Bhishma checked those by his prowess, and pierced each of the contending kings with 2 shafts. The combat became so fierce with that dense shower of arrows and other missiles that it looked very much like the encounter between the Celestials and the Asuras of old, and men of courage who took no part in it were struck with fear even to look at the scene. Bhishma cut off, with his arrows, on the field of battle, bows and flagstaffs, and coats of mail, and human heads, by hundreds and thousands. And such was his terrible prowess and extraordinary lightness of hand, and such the skill with which he protected himself, that the contending car warriors, though his enemies, began to applaud him loudly. Then that foremost of all wielders of weapons, having vanquished in battle all those monarchs, pursued his way towards the capital of the Bharatas, taking those maidens with him. It was then, O king, that mighty car warrior, King Salya of immeasurable prowess, from behind summoned Bhishma, the son of Santanu, to an encounter. And desirous of obtaining the maidens, he came upon Bhishma like a mighty leader of a herd of elephants rushing upon another of his kind, and tearing with his tusks the latter's hips at the sight of a female elephant in heat. And Salya of mighty arms, moved by wrath, addressed Bhishma and said, "Stay, stay." Then Bhishma, that tiger among men, that grinder of hostile armies, provoked by these words, flamed up in wrath like a blazing fire. Bow in hand, and brow furrowed into wrinkles, he stayed on his car, in obedience to Kshatriya usage, having checked its course in expectation of the enemy. All the monarchs seeing him stop, stood there to become spectators of the coming encounter between him and Salia. The two then began to exhibit their prowess, upon each other, like roaring bulls of great strength at the sight of a cow in rut. Then that foremost of men, King Salia covered Bhishma, the son of Santanu, with hundreds and thousands of swift-winged shafts. And those monarchs, seeing Salia thus covering Bhishma at the outset with innumerable shafts, wondered much and uttered shouts of applause. Beholding his lightness of hand in combat, the crowd of regal spectators became very glad and applauded Salia greatly. That subjugator of hostile towns, Bhishma, then, on hearing those shouts of the Kshatriyas, became very angry and said, "Stay, stay." In wrath, he commanded his charioteer, saying, "Lead thou my car to where Salia is, so that I may slay him." Instantly, as Garuda slays a serpent. Then the Kuru chief fixed the Varuna weapon on his bowstring, and with it afflicted the four steeds of King Salia. And, O tiger among kings, the Kuru chief, then, warding off with his weapons those of his foe, slew Salia's charioteer. Then that first of men, Bhishma, the son of Santanu, fighting for the sake of those damsels, slew with the Indra weapon the noble steeds of his adversary. He then vanquished that best of monarchs, but left him with his life. O bull of Bharata's race, Salia, after his defeat, returned to his kingdom, and continued to rule it virtuously. And O conqueror of hostile towns, the other kings also, who had come to witness the self-choice ceremony, returned to their own kingdoms. That foremost of smiters, viz., Bhishma, after defeating those monarchs, set out with those damsels, for Hastinapura, whence the virtuous Kuru Prince Vishitravirya ruled the earth like that best of monarchs, viz., his father Santanu. And, O king, passing through many forests, rivers, hills, and woods abounding with trees, he arrived, at the capital, in no time. Of immeasurable prowess in battle, the son of the ocean-going Gunga, having slain numberless foes in battle without a scratch on his own person, brought the daughters of the king of Kasi unto the Kurus as tenderly if they were his daughters-in-law, or younger sisters, or daughters. And Bhishma of mighty arms, impelled by the desire of benefiting his brother, having by his prowess brought them thus, then offered those maidens possessing every accomplishment unto Vishitravirya, conversant with the dictates of virtue, the son of Santanu, having achieved such an extraordinary feat according to kingly custom, then began to make preparations for his brother's wedding. And when everything about the wedding had been settled by Bhishma in consultation with Satyavati, the eldest daughter of the king of Kasi, with a soft smile, told him these words, "At heart I had chosen the king of Sabha for my husband. He had, in his heart, accepted me for his wife. This was also approved by my father. At the self-choice ceremony also I would have chosen him as my lord. Thou art conversant with all the dictates of virtue, knowing all this, do as thou likest." Thus addressed by that maiden in the presence of the Brahmanas, the heroic Bhishma began to reflect as to what should be done. As he was conversant with the rules of virtue, he consulted with the Brahmanas who had mastered the Vedas, and permitted Amba, the eldest daughter of the ruler of Kasi, to do as she liked. But he bestowed with due rights the two other daughters, Ambika and Ambalika, on his younger brother Vishitravirya. And though Vishitravirya was virtuous and abstemious, yet, proud of youth and beauty, he soon became lustful after his marriage. And both Ambika and Ambalika were of tall stature, and of the complexion of molten gold. And their heads were covered with black curly hair, and their fingernails were high and red. Their hips were fat and round, and their breasts full and deep. And, endued with every auspicious mark, the amiable young ladies considered themselves to be wedded to a husband who was every way worthy of themselves, and extremely loved and respected Vishitravirya. And Vishitravirya also, endued with the prowess of the celestials and the beauty of the twin Aswins, could steal the heart of any beautiful woman. And the prince passed 7 years uninterruptedly in the company of his wives. He was attacked while yet in the prime of youth, with phthisis. Friends and relatives in consultation with one another tried to effect a cure. But in spite of all efforts, the Kuru prince died, setting like the evening sun. The virtuous Bhishma then became plunged into anxiety and grief, and in consultation with Satyavati caused the obsequial rites of the deceased to be performed by learned priests and the several of the Kuru race. Section CIII. Sambhava Parva continued. Vaisampayana said, the unfortunate Satyavati then became plunged in grief on account of her son. And after performing with her daughters-in-law the funeral rites of the deceased, consoled, as best she could, her weeping daughters-in-law and Bhishma, that foremost of all wielders of weapons. And turning her eyes to religion, and to the paternal and maternal lines of the Kurus, she addressed Bhishma and said the funeral cake, the achievements and the perpetuation of the line of the virtuous and celebrated Santanu of Kuru's race, all now depend on thee. As the attainment of heaven is inseparable from good deeds, as long life is inseparable from truth and faith, so is virtue inseparable from thee. O virtuous one, thou art well acquainted, in detail and in the abstract, with the dictates of virtue, with various Sritis, and with all the branches of the Vedas. Know very well that thou art equal unto Sakra and Angaras as regards firmness in virtue, knowledge of the particular customs of families, and readiness of inventions under difficulties. Therefore, O foremost of virtuous men, relying on thee greatly, I shall appoint thee in a certain matter. Hearing me, it behoveth thee to do my bidding. O bull among men, my son, and thy brother, endued with energy and dear unto thee, hath gone childless to heaven, while still a boy. These wives of thy brother, the amiable daughters of the ruler of Kasi, possessing beauty and youth, have become desirous of children. Therefore, O thou of mighty arms, at my command, raise offspring on them for the perpetuation of our line. It behoveth thee to guard virtue against loss. Install thyself on the throne and rule the kingdom of the Bharatas. Wed thou duly a wife. Plunge not thy ancestors into hell. Vaisampayana continued, thus addressed by his mother and friends and relatives, that oppressor of foes, the virtuous Bhishma, gave this reply. Conformable to the dictates of virtue, O mother, what thou sayest is certainly sanctioned by virtue. But thou knowest what my vow is in the matter of begetting children. Thou knowest also all that transpired in connection with thy dower. O Satyavati, I repeat the pledge I once gave. Viz., I would renounce 3 worlds, the empire of heaven, anything that may be greater than that, but truth I would never renounce. The earth may renounce its scent, water may renounce its moisture, light may renounce its attribute of exhibiting forms, air may renounce its attribute of touch, the sun may renounce his glory, fire, its heat, the moon, his cooling rays, space, its capacity of generating sound, the slayer of Vritra, his prowess, the god of justice, his impartiality, but I cannot renounce truth. thus addressed by her son endued with wealth of energy. Satyavati said unto Bhishma, O thou whose prowess is truth, I know of thy firmness in truth. Thou canst, if so minded, create, by the help of thy energy, 3 worlds other than those that exist. I know what thy vow was on my account. But considering this emergency, bear thou the burden of the duty that one owed to his ancestors. O punisher of foes, act in such a way that the lineal link may not be broken and our friends and relatives may not grieve. Thus urged by the miserable and weeping Satyavati, speaking such words inconsistent with virtue from grief at the loss of her son, Bhishma addressed her again and said, O queen, turn not thy eyes away from virtue. O, destroy us not. Breach of truth by a Kshatriya is never applauded in our treatises on religion. I shall soon tell thee, O queen, what the established Kshatriya usage is, to which recourse may be had to prevent Santanu's line becoming extinct on earth. Hearing me, reflect on what should be done in consultation with learned priests and those that are acquainted with practices allowable in times of emergency and distress, forgetting not at the same time what the ordinary course of social conduct is. Section Civ. Sambhava Parva continued. Bhishma continued, in olden days, Rama, the son of Jamadagna, in anger at the death of his father, slew with his battle axe the king of the Hyayas. And Rama, by cutting off the 1,000 arms of Arjuna, the Hyaya king, achieved a most difficult feat in the world. Not content with this, he set out on his chariot for the conquest of the world, and, taking up his bow, he cast around his mighty weapons to exterminate the Kshatriyas and the illustrious scion of Bhrigu's race. By means of his swift arrows annihilated the Kshatriya tribe 21 times. And when the earth was thus deprived of Kshatriyas by the great Rishi, the Kshatriya ladies all over the land had offspring raised by Brahmanas, skilled in the Vedas. It has been said in the Vedas that the sons so raised Belangeth to him that had married the mother. And the Kshatriya ladies went in unto the Brahmanas not lustfully but from motives of virtue. Indeed, it was thus that the Kshatriya race was revived. In this connection there is another old history that I will recite to you. There was in olden days a wise rishi of the name of Yudhithya. He had a wife of the name Mamta whom he dearly loved. One day Yudhithya's younger brother Vrihaspati, the priest of the celestials, endued with great energy, approached Mamta. The latter, however, told her husband's younger brother that foremost of eloquent men that she had conceived from her connection with his elder brother, and that, therefore, he should not then seek for the consummation of his wishes. She continued, O illustrious Vrihaspati, the child that I have conceived hath studied in his mother's womb the Vedas with the 6 Angas, semen tuum frustraprati non potest. How can then this womb of mine afford room for 2 children at a time? Therefore, it behoveth thee not to seek for the consummation of thy desire at such a time. Thus addressed by her, Vrihaspati, though possessed of great wisdom, succeeded not in suppressing his desire. Quam autanjam cum illicoit urus esset, the child in the womb then addressed him and said, O father, cease from thy attempt. There is no space here for 2. O illustrious one, the room is small. I have occupied it first. Semen tuum prati non potest. It behoveth thee not to afflict me. But Vrihaspati, without listening to what that child in the womb said, sought the embraces of Mamta, possessing the most beautiful pair of eyes. I'll tamen muni ki inventure erat punctum temporis quo humor vitalis jam. Emissum irat providens, viam per quam semen inter possit pedibus obstruxit. Semen ita exissum, excitat et interim projectum est. And the illustrious Vrihaspati, beholding this, became indignant, and reproached Yudhitya's child and cursed him, saying, because thou hast spoken to me in the way thou hast at a time of pleasure that is sought after by all creatures, perpetual darkness shall overtake thee. And from this curse of the illustrious Vrihaspati, Yudhitya's child, who was equal unto Vrihaspati in energy, was born blind and came to be called Durgadamas, enveloped in perpetual darkness. And the wise Durgadamas, possessed of a knowledge of the Vedas, though born blind, succeeded yet by virtue of his learning, in obtaining for a wife a young and handsome Brahmana, maiden of the name of Pradhushi. And having married her, the illustrious Durgadamas, for the expansion of Yudhitya's race, begot upon her several children with Gautama as their eldest. These children, however, were all given to covetousness and folly. The virtuous and illustrious Durgadamas, possessing complete mastery over the Vedas, soon after learned from Surbi's son the practices of their order and fearlessly betook himself to those practices, regarding them with reverence. For shame is the creature of sin and can never be where there is purity of intention. Then those best of Munis that dwelt in the same asylum, beholding him transgress the limits of propriety, became indignant, seeing sin where sin was not. And they said, oh, this man transgresseth the limit of propriety. No longer doth he deserve a place amongst us. Therefore, shall we all cast this sinful wretch off. And they said many other things regarding the Muni Durgadamas. And his wife, too, having obtained children, became indignant with him. The husband then addressing his wife Pradhushi, said, why is it that thou also hast been dissatisfied with me? His wife answered, the husband is called the Bhartri because he supporteth the wife. He is called Pati because he protecteth her. But thou art neither, to me. Oh! Thou of great ascetic merit, on the other hand, thou hast been blind from birth, it is I who have supported thee and thy children. I shall not do so in future. Hearing these words of his wife, the Rishi became indignant and said unto her and her children, take me unto the Kshatriyas and thou shalt then be rich. His wife replied, by saying, I desire not wealth that may be procured by thee, for that can never bring me happiness. O best of Brahmanas, do as thou likest. I shall not be able to maintain thee as before. At these words of his wife, Durgadamas said, I lay down from this day as a rule that every woman shall have to adhere to one husband for her life. Be the husband dead or alive, it shall not be lawful for a woman to have connection with another. And she who may have such connection shall certainly be regarded as fallen. A woman without husband shall always be liable to be sinful. And even if she be wealthy, she shall not be able to enjoy that wealth truly. Calumny and evil report shall ever dog her. Hearing these words of her husband Pradhushi became very angry, and commanded her sons, saying, throw him into the waters of Ganga. And at the command of their mother, the wicked Gautama and his brothers, those slaves of covetousness and folly, exclaiming, indeed, why should we support this old man, tied the Muni to a raft and, committing him to the mercy of the stream, returned home without compunction. The blind old man, drifting along the stream on that raft, passed through the territories of many kings. One day a king named Vala, conversant with every duty, went to the Ganges to perform his ablutions. And as the monarch was thus engaged, the raft to which the rishi was tied, approached him. And as it came, the king took the old man, the virtuous Vala, ever devoted to truth, then learning who the man was that was thus saved by him, chose him for raising up offspring. And Vala said, O illustrious one, it behoveth thee to raise upon my wife a few sons, that shall be virtuous and wise. Thus addressed, the Rishi endued with great energy, expressed his willingness. Thereupon King Vala sent his wife Sudeshna unto him. But the queen, knowing that the latter was blind and old, went not unto him, she sent unto him her nurse. And upon that Sidra woman the virtuous Rishi of passions under full control begot 11 children, of whom G.V.B was the eldest. And beholding those 11 sons with G.V.B as the eldest, who had studied all the Vedas, and who like rishis were utterers of Brahma and were possessed of great power, King Vala one day asked the rishi, saying, Are these children mine? The rishi replied, No, they are mine. G.V.B and others have been begotten by me upon a Sudra woman. Thy unfortunate queen Sudeshna, seeing me blind and old, insulted me by not coming herself but sending unto me, instead, her nurse. The king then pacified that best of rishis, and sent unto him his queen Sudeshna. The rishi, by merely touching her person, said to her, Thou shalt have 5 children named Anga, Vanga, Kalanga, Pundra, and Suma, who shall be like unto Surya, sun, himself in glory. And after their names as many countries shall be known on earth. It is after their names that their dominions have come to be called Anga, Vanga, Kalanga, Pundra, and Suma. It was thus that the line of Vala was perpetuated, in days of old, by a great rishi. And it was thus also that many mighty bowmen and great car warriors wedded to virtue, sprung in the Kshatriya race from the seed of Brahmanas. Hearing this, O mother, do as thou likest, as regards the matter in hand. Section CV. Samhava Parva continued. Bhishma continued, Listen, O mother, to me as I indicate the means by which the Bharata line may be perpetuated. Let an accomplished Brahmana be invited by an offer of wealth, and let him raise offspring upon the wives of Vishitravirya. Vaisampayana continued, Satyavati, then, smiling softly and in voice broken in bashfulness, addressed Bhishma, saying, O Bharata of mighty arms, what thou sayest is true. From my confidence in thee I shall now indicate the means of perpetuating our line. Thou shalt not be able to reject it, being conversant, as thou art, with the practices permitted in seasons of distress. In our race, thou art virtue, and thou art truth. And thou art, too, our sole refuge. Therefore, hearing what I say truly, do what may be proper. My father was a virtuous man. For virtue's sake he had kept a ferry boat. One day, in the prime of my youth, I went to ply that boat. It so happened that the great and wise Rishi Parasra, that foremost of all virtuous men, came, and betook himself to my boat for crossing the Yamuna. As I was rowing him across the river, the Rishi became excited with desire and began to address me in soft words. The fear of my father was uppermost in my mind. But the terror of the Rishi's curse at last prevailed. And having obtained from him a precious boon, I could not refuse his solicitations. The Rishi by his energy brought me under his complete control, and gratified his desire then and there, having first enveloped the region in a thick fog. Before this there was a revolting, fishy odor in my body, but the Rishi dispelled it and gave me my present fragrance. The Rishi also told me that by bringing forth his child in an island of the river, I would still continue to be a virgin. And the child of Parasra so born of me in my maidenhood hath become a great Rishi endued with large ascetic powers and known by the name of Dwaipayana, the island-born. That illustrious Rishi, having by his ascetic power divided the Vedas into 4 parts, hath come to be called on earth by the name of Vyasa, the divider or arranger, and for his dark color, Krishna, the dark. Truthful in speech, free from passion, a mighty ascetic who hath burnt all his sins, he went away with his father immediately after his birth. Appointed by me and thee also, that Rishi of incomparable splendor will certainly beget good children upon the wives of thy brother. He told me when he went away, Mother, think of me when thou art in difficulty. I will now call him up, if thou, O Bhishma of mighty arms, so desirest. If thou art willing, O Bhishma, I am sure that great ascetic will beget children upon Vishitravirya's field. Vaisampayana continued, mention being made of the great Rishi, Bhishma, with joined palms said, that man is truly intelligent who fixes his eyes judiciously on virtue, profit, and pleasure, and who after reflecting with patience, acteth in such a way that virtue may lead to future virtue, profit to future profit, and pleasure to future pleasure. Therefore, that which hath been said by thee, and which, besides being beneficial to us, is consistent with virtue, is certainly the best advice, and hath my full approval. And when Bhishma had said this, O thou of Kuru's race, Kali, Satyavati, thought of the Muni Dwaipayana, and Dwaipayana, who was then engaged in interpreting the Vedas, learning that he was being called up by his mother, came instantly unto her without anybody's knowing it. Satyavati then duly greeted her son and embraced him with arms, bathing him in her tears, for the daughter of the fisherman wept bitterly at the sight of her son after so long a time. And her first son, the great Vyasa, beholding her weeping, washed her with cool water, and bowing unto her, said, I have come, O mother, to fulfill thy wishes. Therefore, O virtuous one, command me without delay. I shall accomplish thy desire. The family priest of the Bharatas then worshipped the great Rishi duly, and the latter accepted the offerings of worship, uttering the usual mantras. And gratified with the worship he received, he took his seat. Satyavati, beholding him seated at his ease, after the usual inquiries, addressed him and said, O learned one, sons derive their birth both from the father and the mother. They are, therefore, the common property of both parents. There cannot be the least doubt about it, that the mother hath as much power over them as the father. As thou art, indeed, my eldest son according to the ordinance, O Brahmarshi, so is Vishitravirya my youngest son. And as Bhishma is Vishitravirya's brother on the father's side, so art thou his brother on the same mother's side. I do not know what you may think, but this is what, O son, I think. This Bhishma, the son of Santanu, devoted to truth, doth not, for the sake of truth, entertain the desire of either begetting children or ruling the kingdom. Therefore, from affection for thy brother Vishitravirya, for the perpetuation of our dynasty, for the sake of this Bhishma's request and my command, for kindness to all creatures, for the protection of the people, and from the liberality of thy heart, O sinless one, it behoveth thee to do what I say. Thy younger brother hath left 2 widows like unto the daughters of the celestials themselves, endued with youth and great beauty. For the sake of virtue and religion, they have become desirous of offspring. Thou art the fittest person to be appointed. Therefore beget upon them children worthy of our race and for the continuance of our line. Vyasa, hearing this, said, O Satyavati, thou knowest what virtue is, both in respect of this life and the other. O thou of great wisdom, thy affections also are set on virtue. Therefore, at thy command, making virtue my motive, I shall do what thou desirest. Indeed, this practice that is conformable to the true and eternal religion is known to me. I shall give unto my brother children that shall be like unto Mitra and Varuna. Let the ladies then duly observe for 1 full year the vow I indicate. They shall then be purified. No women shall ever approach me without having observed a rigid vow. Satyavati then said, O sinless one, it must be as thou sayest. Take such steps that the ladies may conceive immediately. In a kingdom where there is no king, the people perish from want of protection, sacrifices and other holy acts are suspended, the clouds send no showers, and the gods disappear. How can a kingdom be protected that hath no king? Therefore, see thou that the ladies conceive. Bhishma will watch over the children as long as they are in their mothers' wombs. Vyasa replied, If I am to give unto my brother children so unseasonably, then let the ladies bear my ugliness. That in itself shall, in their case, be the austerest of penances. If the princess of Kosala can bear my strong odor, my ugly and grim visage, my attire and body, she shall then conceive an excellent child. Vaisampayana continued, having spoken thus unto Satyavati, Vyasa of great energy addressed her and said, Let the princess of Kosala clad in clean attire and checked with ornaments wait for me in her bedchamber. Saying this, the rishi disappeared. Satyavati then went to her daughter-in-law and seeing her in private spoke to her these words of beneficial and virtuous import, O princess of Kosala, listen to what I say. It is consistent with virtue. The dynasty of the Bharatas hath become extinct from my misfortune. Beholding my affliction and the extinction of his paternal line, the wise Bhishma, impelled also by the desire of perpetuating our race, hath made me a suggestion, which suggestion, however, for its accomplishment is dependent on thee. Accomplish it, O daughter, and restore the lost line of the Bharatas. O thou of fair hips, bring thou forth a child equal in splendor unto the chief of the celestials. He shall bear the onerous burden of this our hereditary kingdom. Satyavati having succeeded with great difficulty in procuring the assent of her virtuous daughter-in-law to her proposal which was not inconsistent with virtue, then fed Brahmanas and Rishis and numberless guests who arrived on the occasion. Section CVI. Samhava Parva continued. Vaisampayana said, soon after the monthly season of the princess of Kosala had been over, Satyavati, purifying her daughter-in-law with a bath, led her into the sleeping apartment. There seating her upon a luxurious bed, she addressed her, saying, O princess of Kosala, thy husband hath an elder brother who shall this day enter thy womb as thy child. Wait for him tonight without dropping off to sleep. Hearing these words of her mother-in-law, the amiable princess, as she lay on her bed, began to think of Bhishma and the other elders of the Kuru race. Then the rishi of truthful speech, who had given his promise in respect of Ambika, the eldest of the princesses, in the first instance, entered her chamber. While the lamp was burning, the princess, seeing his dark visage, his matted locks of copper hue, blazing eyes, his grim beard, closed her eyes in fear. The rishi, from desire of accomplishing his mother's wishes, however knew her. But the latter, struck with fear, opened not her eyes, even once to look at him. And when Vyasa came out, he was met by his mother, who asked him, Shall the princess have an accomplished son? Hearing her, he replied, the son of the princess she will bring forth shall be equal in might unto 10,000 elephants. He will be an illustrious royal sage, possessed of great learning and intelligence and energy. The high-souled one shall have in his time a century of sons. But from the fault of his mother he shall be blind at these words of her son. Satyavati said, O thou of ascetic wealth, how can one that is blind become a monarch worthy of the Kurus? How can one that is blind become the protector of his relatives and family, and the glory of his father's race? It behoveth thee to give another king unto the Kurus. Saying, so be it, Vyasa went away. And the first princess of Kosala in due time brought forth a blind son. Soon after Satyavati, O chastiser of foes, summoned Vyasa, after having secured the assent of her daughter-in-law. Vyasa came according to his promise, and approached, as before, the second wife of his brother. And Ambalika, beholding the rishi, became pale with fear, and, O Bharata, beholding her so afflicted and pale with fear, Vyasa addressed her and said, because thou hast been pale with fear at the sight of my grim visage, therefore, thy child shall be pale in complexion. O thou of handsome face, the name also thy child shall bear will be Pandu, the pale. Saying this, the illustrious and best of rishis came out of her chamber. And as he came out, he was met by his mother, who asked him about the would-be child. The rishi told her that the child would be of pale complexion and known by the name of Pandu. Satyavati again begged of the rishi another child, and the rishi told her in reply, so be it. Ambalika, then, when her time came, brought forth a son of pale complexion. Blazing with beauty, the child was endued with all auspicious marks. Indeed, it was this child who afterwards became the father of those mighty archers, the Pandavas. Some time after, when the oldest of Vishitravirya's widows again had her monthly season, she was solicited by Satyavati to approach Vyasa once again. Possessed of beauty like a daughter of a celestial, the princess refused to do her mother-in-law's bidding, remembering the grim visage and strong odor of the rishi. She, however, sent unto him a maid of hers, endued with the beauty of an apsara and decked with her own ornaments. And when the Vyasa arrived, the maid rose up and saluted him. And she waited upon him respectfully and took her seat near him when asked. And, O king, the great rishi of rigid vows, was well pleased with her, and when he rose to go away, he addressed her and said, Amiable one, thou shalt no longer be a slave. Thy child also shall be greatly fortunate and virtuous, and the foremost of all intelligent men on earth. And, O king, the son thus begotten upon her by Krishnadwaipayana was afterwards known by the name of Vijaya. He was thus the brother of Dhritarashtra and the illustrious Pandu. And Vijaya was free from desire and passion, and was conversant with the rules of government, and was the god of justice born on earth under the curse of the illustrious rishi Mandavya. And Krishnadwaipayana, when he met his mother as before, informed her as to how he had been deceived by the senior most of the princesses, and how he had begotten a son upon a Sudra woman. And having spoken thus unto his mother, the rishi disappeared from her sight. Thus were born, in the field of Vishitravirya, even of Dwaipayana, those sons of the splendor of celestial children, those propagators of the Kuru race. Section CVII. Sambhava Parva continued. Janamejaya said, what did the god of justice do for which he was cursed? And who was the Brahmana ascetic from whose curse the god had to be born in the Sudra caste? Vaisampayana said, there was a Brahmana known by the name of Mandavya. he was conversant with all duties and was devoted to religion, truth and asceticism. The great ascetic used to sit at the entrance of his hermitage at the foot of a tree, with his arms upraised in the observance of the vow of silence. And as he sat there for years together, one day there came into his asylum a number of robbers laden with spoil. And, oh, bull in Bharata's race, those robbers were then being pursued by a superior body as guardians of the peace. The thieves, on entering that asylum, hid their booty there, and in fear concealed themselves thereabout before the guards came. But scarcely had they thus concealed themselves when the constables in pursuit came to the spot. The latter, observing the rishi sitting under the tree, questioned him, "O king," saying, "O best of Brahmanas, which way have the thieves taken? Point it out to us so that we may follow it without loss of time." Thus questioned by the guardians of peace, the ascetic, "O king," said not a word, good or otherwise, in reply. The officers of the king, however, on searching that asylum soon discovered the thieves concealed thereabout together with the plunder. Upon this, their suspicion fell upon the Muni, and accordingly they seized him with the thieves and brought him before the king. The king sentenced him to be executed along with his supposed associates. And the officers, acting in ignorance, carried out the sentence by impaling the celebrated rishi. And having impaled him, they went to the king with the booty they had recovered. But the virtuous rishi, though impaled and kept without food, remained in that state for a long time without dying. And the rishi by his ascetic power not only preserved his life but summoned other rishi to the scene. And they came there in the night in the forms of birds, and beholding him engaged in ascetic meditation, though fixed on that stake, became plunged into grief. And telling that best of Brahmanas who they were, they asked him saying, "O Brahmana, we desire to know what hath been thy sin for which thou hast thus been made to suffer the tortures of impalement." Section K.I.N. Sambhava Parva continued. Vaisampayana said, thus asked, the tiger among Munis then answered, "Those rishis of ascetic wealth, whom shall I blame for this? In fact, none else, than my own self, hath offended against me." After this, O monarch, the officers of justice, seeing him alive, informed the king of it. The latter, hearing what they said, consulted with his advisers, and came to the place and began to pacify the rishi fixed on the stake. And the king said, "O thou best of rishis, I have offended against thee in ignorance. I beseech thee to pardon me for the same. It behoveth thee not to be angry with me." Thus addressed by the king, the Muni was pacified. And beholding him free from wrath, the king took him up with the stake, and endeavored to extract it from his body. But not succeeding therein, he cut it off at the point just outside the body. The Muni, with a portion of the stake within his body, walked about, and in that state practiced the austerest of penances and conquered numberless regions unattainable by others. And for the circumstances of a part of the stake being within his body, he came to be known in the three worlds by the name of Ani Mandavya, Mandavya with the stake within. And one day that Brahmana acquainted with the highest truth of religion went unto the abode of the God of justice. And beholding the God there seated on his throne, the rishi reproached him and said, "What, pray, is that sinful act committed by me unconsciously, for which I am bearing this punishment? Oh, tell me soon, and behold the power of my asceticism." The God of justice, thus questioned, replied, "O thou of ascetic wealth, a little insect was once pierced by thee on a blade of grass. Thou bearest now the consequence of the act. O Rishi, as a gift, however small, multiplieth in respect of its religious merits, so a sinful act multiplieth in respect of the woe it bringeth in its train. On hearing this, Ani Mandavya asked, O tell me truly when this act was committed by me. Told in reply by the god of justice that he had committed it, when a child. The Rishi said, that shall not be a sin which may be done by a child up to the 12th year of his age from birth. The scriptures shall not recognize it as sinful. The punishment thou hast inflicted on me for such a venial offense hath been disproportionate in severity. The killing of a Brahmana involves a sin that is heavier than the killing of any other living being. Thou shalt, therefore, O God of justice, have to be born among men even in the Sudra order. And from this day I establish this limit in respect of the consequence of acts, that an act shall not be sinful when committed by one below the age of 14. But when committed by one above that age, it shall be regarded as sin. Vaisampayana continued, cursed for this fault by that illustrious Rishi, the god of justice had his birth as Vijara in the Sudra order. And Vijara was well versed in the doctrines of morality and also politics and worldly profit. And he was entirely free from covetousness and wrath. Possessed of great foresight and undisturbed tranquility of mind, Vijara was ever devoted to the welfare of the Kurus. Section CIX. Sambhava Parva continued. Vaisampayana said, upon the birth of those three children, Kurujangala, Kurukshetra, and the Kurus grew in prosperity. The earth began to yield abundant harvest, and the crops also were of good flavor. And the clouds began to pour rain in season, and trees became full of fruits and flowers. And the draft cattle were all happy, and the birds and other animals rejoiced exceedingly. And the flowers became fragrant, and the fruits became sweet. The cities and towns became filled with merchants, artisans, traders, and artists of every description. And the people became brave, learned, honest, and happy. And there were no robbers then, nor anybody who was sinful. And it seemed that the golden age had come upon every part of the kingdom. And the people devoted to virtuous acts, sacrifices and truth, and regarding one another with love and affection, grew in prosperity. And free from pride, wrath, and covetousness, they rejoiced in perfectly innocent sports. And the capital of the Kurus, full as the ocean, was a second Amaravati, teeming with hundreds of palaces and mansions, and possessing gates and arches dark as the clouds. And men in great cheerfulness sported constantly on rivers, lakes, and tanks, and in fine groves and charming woods. And the southern Kurus, in their virtuous rivalry with their northern kinsmen, walked about in the company of Siddhas and Charanas and Rishis. And all over that delightful country, whose prosperity was thus increased by the Kurus, there were no misers, and no widowed women. And the wells and lakes were ever full, the groves abounded with trees, and the houses and abodes of Brahmanas were full of wealth, and the whole kingdom was full of festivities. And, O king, virtuously ruled by Bhishma, the kingdom was adorned with hundreds of sacrificial stakes. And the will of virtue having been set in motion by Bhishma, and the country became so contented that the subjects of other kingdoms, quitting their homes, came to dwell there and increase its population. And the citizens and the people were filled with hope, upon seeing the youthful acts of their illustrious princes. And, O king, in the house of the Kuru chiefs as also of the principal citizens, give, eat were the only words constantly heard. And Dhritarashtra and Pandu and Vijara of great intelligence were from their birth brought up by Bhishma, as if they were his own sons. And the children, having passed through the usual rites of their order, devoted themselves to vows and study. And they grew up into fine young men skilled in the Vedas and all athletic sports. And they became well skilled in the practice of bow, in horsemanship, in encounters with mace, sword, and shield, in the management of elephants in battle, and in the science of morality. Well read in history and the Puranas and various branches of learning. And acquainted with the truths of the Vedas and their branches, they acquired knowledge, which was versatile and deep. And Pandu, possessed of great prowess, excelled all men in archery, while Dhritarashtra excelled all in personal strength, while in the three worlds there was no one equal to Vijaya in devotion to virtue and in the knowledge of the dictates of morality. And beholding the restoration of the extinct line of Santanu, the saying became current in all countries that among mothers of heroes, the daughters of the king of Kasi were the first, that among countries Kurajangala was the first, that among virtuous men, Vijaya was the first, that among cities Hastinapura was the first. Pandu became king, for Dhritarashtra, owing to the blindness, and Vijaya, for his birth by a Sudra woman, did not obtain the kingdom. One day Bhishma, the foremost of those acquainted with the duties of a statesman and dictates of morality, properly addressing Vijaya conversant with the truth of religion and virtue, said as follows. Section CX. Samhava Parva continued. Bhishma said, this our celebrated race, resplendent with every virtue and accomplishment, hath all along sovereignty over all other monarchs on earth. Its glory maintained and itself perpetuated by many virtuous and illustrious monarchs of old, the illustrious Krishna, Dwapayana, and Satyavati and myself have raised you, 3, up, in order that it may not be extinct. It behoveth myself and thee also to take such steps that this our dynasty may expand again as the sea. It hath been heard by me that there are 3 maidens worthy of being allied to our race. One is the daughter of Surasena of the Yadva race, the other is the daughter of Suvala, and the third is the princess of Madra. O son, all these maidens are of course of blue blood. Possessed of beauty and pure blood, they are eminently fit for an alliance with our family. O thou foremost of intelligent men, I think we should choose them for the growth of our race. Tell me what thou thinkest. Thus addressed, Vijaya replied, Thou art our father and thou art our mother, too. Thou art our respected spiritual instructor. Therefore, do thou what may be best for us in thy eyes. Vaisampayana continued, soon after Bhishma heard from the Brahmanas that Gandhari, the amiable daughter of Suvala, having worshipped Hara Shiva, had obtained from the deity the boon that she should have a century of sons. Bhishma, the grandfather of the Kurus, having heard this, sent messengers unto the king of Gandhara. King Suvala at first hesitated on account of the blindness of the bridegroom, but taking into consideration the blood of the Kurus, their fame and behavior, he gave his virtuous daughter unto Dhritarashtra, and the chaste Gandhari, hearing that Dhritarashtra was blind and that her parents had consented to marry her to him, from love and respect for her future husband, blindfolded her own eyes. Sakuni, the son of Suvala, bringing unto the Kurus his sister, endued with youth and beauty, formally gave her away unto Dhritarashtra. And Gandhari was received with great respect, and the nuptials were celebrated with great pomp under Bhishma's directions. And the heroic Sakuni, after having bestowed his sister along with many valuable robes, and having received Bhishma's adorations, returned to his own city. And, O thou of Bharata's race, the beautiful Gandhari gratified all the Kurus by her behavior and respectful attentions. And Gandhari, ever devoted to her husband, gratified her superiors by her good conduct, and as she was chaste, she never referred even by words to men other than her husband or such superiors. Section CXI. Sambhava Parva continued. Vaisampayana continued. There was amongst the Yadvas a chief named Sura. He was the father of Vasudev. And he had a daughter called Parita, who was unrivaled for beauty on earth. And, O thou of Bharata's race, Sura, always truthful in speech, gave from friendship this his firstborn daughter unto his childless cousin and friend, the illustrious Kuntabhoja, the son of his paternal aunt, pursuant to a former promise. And Parita in the house of her adoptive father was engaged in looking after the duties of hospitality to Brahmanas and other guests. Once she gratified by her attentions the terrible Brahmana of rigid vows, who was known by the name of Durvasa and was well acquainted with the hidden truths of morality. Gratified with her respectful attentions, the sage, anticipating by his spiritual power the future season of distress consequent upon the curse to be pronounced upon Pandu for his unrighteous act of slaying a deer while serving its mate, imparted to her a formula of invocation for summoning any of the celestials she liked to give her children. And the rishi said, those celestials that thou shalt summon by this mantra shall certainly approach thee and give thee children. Thus addressed by the Brahmana, the amiable Kunti, Parita became curious, and in her maidenhood summoned the god Arka, sun. And as soon as he pronounced the mantra, she beheld that effulgent deity, that beholder of everything in the world, approaching her. And beholding that extraordinary sight, the maiden of faultless features was overcome with surprise. But the god Vivasvat, sun, approaching her, said, here I am, O black-eyed girl. Tell me what I am to do for thee. Hearing this, Kunti said, O slayer of foes, a certain Brahmana gave me this formula of invocation as a boon, and, O Lord, I have summoned thee only to test its efficacy. For this offense I bow to thee. A woman, whatever be her offense, always deserveth pardon. Surya, son, replied, I know that Durvasa hath granted this boon. But cast off thy fears, timid maiden, and grant me thy embraces. Amiable one, my approach cannot be futile, it must bear fruit. Thou hast summoned me, and if it be for nothing, it shall certainly be regarded as thy transgression. Vaisampayana continued, Vivasvat thus spoke unto her many things with a view to allay her fears, but, O Bharata, the amiable maiden, from modesty and fear of her relatives, consented not to grant his request. And, O bull of Bharata's race, Arka addressed her again and said, O princess, for my sake, it shall not be sinful for thee to grant my wish. Thus speaking unto the daughter of Kuntabhoja, the illustrious Tapana, the illuminator of the universe, gratified his wish. And of this connection there was immediately born a son known all over the world as Karna, accoutred with natural armor and with face brightened by earrings. And the heroic Karna was the first of all wielders of weapons, blessed with good fortune, and endued with the beauty of a celestial child. And after the birth of this child, the illustrious Tapana granted unto Parita her maidenhood and ascended to heaven. And the princess of the Vrishni race, beholding with sorrow that son born of her, reflected intently upon what was then the best for her to do. And from fear of her relatives she resolved to conceal that evidence of her folly. And she cast her offspring endued with great physical strength into the water. Then the well-known husband of Radha, of the Sutta caste, took up the child thus cast into the water, and he and his wife brought him up as their own son. And Radha and her husband bestowed on him the name of Vasusena, born with wealth, because he was born with a natural armor and earrings. And indeed as he was born with great strength, as he grew up, he became skilled in all weapons. Possessed of great energy, he used to adore the sun until his back was heated by his rays, i.e., from dawn to midday. And during the hours of worship, there was nothing on earth that the heroic and intelligent Vasusena would not give unto the Brahmanas. And Indra, desirous of benefiting his own son Falguni, Arjuna, assuming the form of a Brahmana, approached Vasusena on one occasion and begged of him his natural armor. Thus asked, Karna took off his natural armor, and joining his hands in reverence gave it unto Indra in the guise of a Brahmana. And the chief of the celestials accepted the gift and was exceedingly gratified with Karna's liberality. He therefore gave unto him a fine dart, saying, that one, and one only, among the celestials, the Asuras, men, the Gandharvas, the Nagas, and the Rakshasas, whom thou desirest to conquer, shall be certainly slain with this dart. The son of Surya was before this known by the name of Vasusena. But since he cut off his natural armor, he came to be called Karna, the cutter or peeler of his own cover. Section CXII. Sambhava Parva continued. Vaisampayana said, the large-eyed daughter of Kuntabhoja, Parita by name, was endued with beauty and every accomplishment. Of rigid vows, she was devoted to virtue and possessed of every good quality. But though endued with beauty and youth and every womanly attribute, yet it so happened that no king asked for her hand. Her father Kuntabhoja, seeing this, invited, O best of monarchs, the princes and kings of other countries, and desired his daughter to select her husband from among her guests. The intelligent Kunti, entering the amphitheater, beheld Pandu, the foremost of the Bharatas, that tiger among kings, in that concourse of crowned heads, proud as the lion, broad-chested, bull-eyed, endued with great strength, and outshining all other monarchs in splendor. He looked like another Indra in that royal assemblage. The amiable daughter of Kuntabhoja, of faultless features, beholding Pandu, that best of men in that assembly, became very much agitated, and advancing with modesty, all the while quivering with emotion, she placed the nuptial garland about Pandu's neck. The other monarchs, seeing Kunti choose Pandu for her lord, returned to their respective kingdoms on elephants, horses, and cars, as they had come. Then, O king, the bride's father caused the nuptial rites to be performed duly. The Kuru prince, blessed with great good fortune, and the daughter of Kuntabhoja formed a couple like Maghavat and Palomi, the king and queen of the celestials. And, O best of Kuru monarchs, King Kuntabhoja, after the nuptials were over, presented his son-in-law with much wealth and sent him back to his capital. Then the Kuru prince Pandu, accompanied by a large force bearing various kinds of banners and pennons, and eulogized by Brahmanas and great rishis pronouncing benedictions, reached his capital. And after arriving at his own palace, he established his queen therein. Section XVIII. Sambhava Parva continued. Vaisampayana continued. Some time after, Bhishma, the intelligent son of Santanu, set his heart upon getting Pandu married to a second wife. Accompanied by an army composed of 4 kinds of force, and also by aged counselors and brahmanas and great rishis, he went to the capital of the king of Madra. And that bull of the Valhikas, the king of Madra, hearing that Bhishma had arrived, went out to receive him. And having received him with respect, he got him to enter his palace. Arriving there, the king of Madra offered unto Bhishma a white carpet for a seat, water to wash his feet with, and usual oblation of various ingredients indicative of respect. And when he was seated at ease, the king asked him about the reason of his visit. Then Bhishma, the supporter of the dignity of the Kurus, addressed the king of Madra and said, O oppressor of all foes! Know that I have come for the hand of a maiden. It hath been heard by us that thou hast a sister named Madri, celebrated for her beauty and endued with every virtue. I would choose her for Pandu. Thou art, O king, in every respect worthy of an alliance with us, and we also are worthy of thee. Reflecting upon all this, O king of Madra, accept us duly. The ruler of Madra, thus addressed by Bhishma, replied, To my mind, there is none else than one of thy family with whom I can enter into an alliance. But there is a custom in our family observed by our ancestors, which, be it good or bad, I am incapable of transgressing. It is well known, and therefore is known to thee as well, I doubt not. Therefore, it is not proper for thee to say to me, bestow thy sister. The custom to which I allude is our family custom. With us that is a virtue and worthy of observance. It is for this only, O slayer of foes, I cannot give thee any assurance in the matter of thy request. On hearing this, Bhishma answered the king of Madra, saying, O king, this, no doubt, is a virtue. The self-create himself hath said it. Thy ancestors were observant of custom. There is no fault to find with it. It is also well known, O Salya, that this custom in respect of family dignity hath the approval of the wise and the good. Saying this, Bhishma of great energy, gave unto Salya much gold, both coined and uncoined, and precious stones of various colors by thousands, and elephants, and horses, and cars, and much cloth, and many ornaments, and gems, and pearls, and corals. And Salya, accepting with a cheerful heart those precious gifts, then gave away his sister decked in ornaments unto that bull of the Kuru race. Then the wise Bhishma, the son of the ocean-going Ganga, rejoiced at the issue of his mission, took Madri with him, and returned to the Kuru capital, named after the elephant. Then, selecting an auspicious day and moment as indicated by the wise for the ceremony, King Pandu was duly united with Madri. And after the nuptials were over, the Kuru king established his beautiful bride in handsome apartments. And, O king of kings, that best of monarchs then gave himself up to enjoyment in the company of his two wives as best he liked and to the limit of his desires. And after 30 days had elapsed, the Kuru king, O monarch, started from his capital for the conquest of the world. And after reverentially saluting and bowing to Bhishma and the other elders of the Kuru race, and with adieus to Dhritarashtra and others of the family, and obtaining their leave, he set out on his grand campaign, accompanied by a large force of elephants, horses, and cars. And well pleased with the blessings uttered by all around and the auspicious rites performed by the citizens for his success. And Pandu, accompanied by such a strong force, marched against various foes. And that tiger among men, that spreader of the fame of the Kurus, first subjugated the robber tribes of Asarna. He next turned his army, composed of innumerable elephants, cavalry, infantry, and charioteers, with standards of various colors, against Dirga, the ruler of the kingdom of Magadha, who was proud of his strength, and offended against numerous monarchs. And attacking him in his capital, Pandu slew him there, and took everything in his treasury, and also vehicles and draft animals without number. He then marched into Mithila and subjugated the Videhas. And then, O bull among men, Pandu led his army against Kasi, Sumha, and Pundra, and by the strength and prowess of his arms spread the fame of the Kurus. And Pandu, that oppressor of foes, like unto a mighty fire, whose far-reaching flames were represented by his arrows and splendor by his weapons, began to consume all kings that came in contact with him. These with their forces, vanquished by Pandu at the head of his army, were made the vassals of the Kurus. And all kings of the world, thus vanquished by him, regarded him as the one single hero on earth, even as the celestials regard Indra in heaven. And the kings of earth with joined palms bowed to him and waited on him with presents of various kinds of gems and wealth, precious stones, and pearls and corals, and much gold and silver, and first-class kine and handsome horses and fine cars and elephants and asses and camels and buffaloes, and goats and sheep, and blankets and beautiful hides, and cloths woven out of furs. And the king of Hastinapura, accepting those offerings, retraced his steps towards his capital, to the great delight of his subjects. And the citizens and others, filled with joy, and kings and ministers, all began to say, "Oh, the fame of the achievements of Santanu, that tiger among kings, and of the wise Bharata, which were about to die, hath been revived by Pandu. They who robbed before the Kurus of both territory and wealth have been subjugated by Pandu the tiger of Hastinapura and made to pay tribute." And all the citizens with Bhishma at their head went out to receive the victorious king. They had not proceeded far when they saw the attendants of the king laden with much wealth, and the train of various conveyances, laden with all kinds of wealth, and of elephants, horses, cars, kine, camels and other animals, was so long that they saw not its end. Then Pandu, beholding Bhishma, who was a father to him, worshipped his feet, and saluted the citizens and others as each deserved. And Bhishma, too, embracing Pandu as his son who had returned victorious after grinding many hostile kingdoms, wept tears of joy. And Pandu, instilling joy into the hearts of his people with a flourish of trumpets and conchs and kettle drums, entered his capital. Section CXIV. Sambhava Parva continued. Vaisampayana said, Pandu, then, at the command of Dhritarashtra, offered the wealth he had acquired by the prowess of his arms to Bhishma, their grandmother Satyavati and their mothers. And he sent portion of his wealth to Vijaya also. And the virtuous Pandu gratified his other relatives also with similar presents. Then Satyavati and Bhishma and the Kosala princes were all gratified with the presents Pandu made out of the acquisitions of his prowess. And Ambalika in particular, upon embracing her son of incomparable prowess, became as glad as the queen of heaven. Upon embracing Jayanta, and with the wealth acquired by that hero, Dhritarashtra performed 5 great sacrifices that were equal unto 100 great horse sacrifices, at all of which the offerings to Brahmanas were by hundreds and thousands. A little while after, O bull of Bharata's race, Pandu, who had achieved a victory over sloth and lethargy, accompanied by his 2 wives, Kunti and Madri, retired into the woods. Leaving his excellent palace with its luxurious beds, he became a permanent inhabitant of the woods, devoting the whole of his time to the chase of the deer, and fixing his abode in a delightful and hilly region overgrown with huge sala trees. On the southern slope of the Himavat mountains, he roamed about in perfect freedom. The handsome Pandu with his 2 wives wandered in those woods, like Airavata accompanied by 2 she-elephants. And the dwellers in those woods, beholding the heroic Bharata prince in the company of his wives, armed with sword, arrows, and bow, clad with his beautiful armor, and skilled in all excellent weapons, regarded him as the very god wandering amongst them. And at the command of Dhritarashtra, people were busy in supplying Pandu in his retirement with every object of pleasure and enjoyment. Meanwhile the son of the ocean-going Gunga heard that King Devaka had a daughter endued with youth and beauty and begotten upon a Sudra wife. Bringing her from her father's abode, Bhishma married her to Vijara of great wisdom. And Vijara begot upon her many children like unto himself. In accomplishments. Section CXV. Sambhava Parva continued. Vaisampayana said, meanwhile, O Janamejaya, Dhritarashtra begot upon Gandhari 100 sons, and upon a Vaishya wife another besides those 100. And Pandu had, by his 2 wives Kunti and Madri, 5 sons who were great charioteers and who were all begotten by the celestials for the perpetuation of the Kuru line. Janamejaya said, O best of Brahmanas, how did Gandhari bring forth those 100 sons and in how many years? What were also the periods of life allotted to each? How did Dhritarashtra also beget another son in a Vaishya wife? How did Dhritarashtra behave towards his loving obedient and virtuous wife Gandhari? How were also begotten the 5 sons of Pandu, those mighty charioteers, even though Pandu himself labored under the curse of the great Rishi, he slew? Tell me all this in detail, for my thirst for hearing everything relating to my own ancestor hath not been slaked. Vaisampayana said, one day Gandhari entertained with respectful attention the great Dwaipayana who came to her abode, exhausted with hunger and fatigue. Gratified with Gandhari's hospitality, the Rishi gave her the boon she asked for, viz., that she should have a century of sons, each equal unto her lord in strength and accomplishments. Some time after, Gandhari conceived and she bore the burden in her womb for 2 long years, without being delivered. And she was greatly afflicted at this. It was then that she heard that Kunti had brought forth a son whose splendor was like unto the morning sun. Impatient of the period of gestation which had prolonged so long, and deprived of reason by grief, she struck her womb with great violence without the knowledge of her husband. And thereupon came out of her womb, after 2 years' growth, a hard mass of flesh like unto an iron ball. When she was about to throw it away, Dwaipayana, learning everything by his spiritual powers, promptly came there, and that first of ascetics beholding that ball of flesh, addressed the daughter of Suvala thus, what hast thou done? Gandhari, without endeavoring to disguise her feelings, addressed the Rishi and said, having heard that Kunti had brought forth a son like unto Surya in splendor, I struck in grief at my womb. Thou hadst, O Rishi, granted me the boon that I should have 100 sons, but here is only a ball of flesh for those 100 sons. Vyasa then said, daughter of Suvala, it is even so. But my words can never be futile. I have not spoken an untruth even in jest. I need not speak of other occasions. Let 100 pots full of clarified butter be brought instantly, and let them be placed at a concealed spot. In the meantime, let cool water be sprinkled over this ball of flesh. Vaisampayana continued, that ball of flesh then, sprinkled over with water, became, in time, divided into 101 parts, each about the size of the thumb. These were then put into those pots full of clarified butter that had been placed at a concealed spot and were watched with care. The illustrious Vyasa then said unto the daughter of Suvala that she should open the covers of the pots after full 2 years. And having said this and made these arrangements, the wise Dwaipayana went to the Himavat mountains for devoting himself to asceticism. Then in time, King Duryodhana was born from among those pieces of the ball of flesh that had been deposited in those pots. According to the order of birth, King Yudhishthira was the oldest. The news of Duryodhana's birth was carried to Bhishma and the wise Vijaya. The day that the haughty Duryodhana was born was also the birthday of Bhima of mighty arms and great prowess. As soon as Duryodhana was born, he began to cry and bray like an ass. And hearing that sound, the asses, vultures, jackals and crows uttered their respective cries responsively. Violent winds began to blow, and there were fires in various directions. Then King Dhritarashtra in great fear, summoning Bhishma and Vijaya and other well-wishers and all the Kurus, and numberless Brahmanas, addressed them and said, "The oldest of those princes, Yudhishthira, is the perpetuator of our line. By virtue of his birth he hath acquired the kingdom. We have nothing to say to this. But shall this my son born after him become king? Tell me truly what is lawful and right under these circumstances." As soon as these words were spoken, O Bharata, jackals and other carnivorous animals began to howl ominously, and marking those frightful omens all around, the assembled Brahmanas and the wise Vijaya replied, "O king, O bull among men, when these frightful omens are noticeable at the birth of thy eldest son, it is evident that he shall be the exterminator of thy race. The prosperity of all dependeth on his abandonment. Calamity there must be in keeping him. O king, if thou abandonest him, there remain yet thy 99 sons. If thou desirest the good of thy race, abandon him, O Bharata. O king, do good to the world and thy own race by casting off this one child of thine. It hath been said that an individual should be cast off for the sake of the family, that a family should be cast off for the sake of a village, that a village may be abandoned for the sake of the whole country, and that the earth itself may be abandoned for the sake of the soul." When Vijaya and those Brahmanas had stated so, King Dhritarashtra, out of affection for his son, had not the heart to follow that advice. Then, O king, within a month, were born a full 100 sons unto Dhritarashtra and a daughter also in excess of this 100. And during the time when Gandhari was in a state of advanced pregnancy, there was a maid-servant of the Vaishya class who used to attend on Dhritarashtra. During that year, O king, was begotten upon her by the illustrious Dhritarashtra a son endued with great intelligence, who was afterwards named Yavutsu. And because he was begotten by a Kshatriya upon a Vaishya woman, he came to be called Karna. Thus were born unto the wise Dhritarashtra 100 sons who were all heroes and mighty chariot fighters, and a daughter over and above the 100, and another son Yuyutsu of great energy and prowess begotten upon a Vaishya woman.